Hey guys, so today in this video I basically want to talk about what I think are the biggest opportunities that are coming our way in 2020 and beyond, 2020 to 2025. And actually at the end of this video you will know the single industry or the space within that industry which I think everyone should be entering right now. Um, so it's going to be a little bit different from other videos where where you're not given a clear answer. I know there are a lot of videos that discusses a similar thing out there, and the answer they usually get is, there really isn't a single industry. That's good. It depends on what you make of it. So that answer is great and is true, but it's not very helpful because it doesn't give you a concrete answer that you're looking for. So in this video, what I'm trying to do is I'm going to try and give you an answer, a specific answer by the end of this video, and to provide you with the evidence and the numbers and the data to show you why I think is the case. And actually this industry is what me personally is getting into. So I'm not just saying that for this video, but I'm actually also doing what I'm preaching here. Okay. And again, this is just my personal opinion. Of course, there isn't like one objectively the best industry to get into, because there are just so many different subjective opinions. Even though there are numbers you can look at, it's always subjective when it comes to business decisions. So this is just my opinion, and yeah, I've done a lot of research into this, so I'll be sharing with you my key findings. So as you can probably tell by now, the industry that I'm talking about is the gaming industry. And I think, especially within online marketing or online digital marketing, people don't really talk about the gaming industry. And in fact, the gaming industry is not really talked about at all outside of the gaming industry itself. And I think, the fact that it's so underrated and not talked about, it's a good thing because it means that there are less competition, and it means more profits. It's more lucrative for people who are in it and who know about it. So when you look at the overall entertainment industry, so entertainment industry is a category, and it includes different sub industries such as film, music, and gaming. Right, these are the three big categories of entertainment. If you look at the revenue from each of these sources, what you'll find today is that the revenue from gaming actually is larger than film and music combined. So think about all the uh, revenue, all the profits that filmmakers get, from Avatar, Avengers Endgame, all these movies plus music, all your favorite, um, celebrities and singers, right? All of their revenue added together is still smaller than the revenue from the gaming industry, and the gaming industry is still in its infancy stage. So that means it's huge. It's huge, but no one really talks about it. It's not in the media, and so no one really knows about it. Okay, but to give you some numbers, it's basically around 152 billion US dollars, and that's coming from 2.5 billion users or gamers around the world. And if you can look at this here, this graph here, what you see is that the growth per year, it's at 9%. What this means is that it's growing per year at 9%. So it's compounded growth. And 9% is actually really, really high. And if you look at some benchmarks, and what I did here is I literally just went on Google and I searched the top 10 fastest growing industries and clicked on the very first link. And what you find is that you have numbers like 8.8% all the way down to 4.8%. And the point being is 9%, it's not reported here, but it's extremely high, right? It's very good. And when you look at a market, you should always look at, well, first of all, its size, but also more important for us is the growth rate, because as someone who's considering entering into a new market, it's unlikely you're going to capture significant market share from existing players. That means if you're entering into a market that's not growing, it's very hard for you to grab a share of that pie, because it's already dominated by other players, by existing players. Whereas if you join a growing market, expanding market, it's very easy or much easier to capture some of that growing share, because when the market is growing, you're not taking it away from somebody else. You're just taking it from the market, right? For example, in real terms, what this means is instead of having to steal a customer away from your competitor, you would literally be selling to customers who are actively looking for your product or your services, and that's a lot easier than trying to persuade someone to switch providers or switch their loyalty. And by the way, just to go back to give you some context as to why we're actually looking at markets right now, why we're looking at this gaming market and its growth rates and looking at all these numbers. The reason we're doing this is because the most important concept when it comes to business is blue ocean and red ocean. It's a concept that came out of a book, and the whole idea is that as a business, if you're operating in a space that's overcrowded, that has a lot of competition, then it's bloodied with competition. Because all the sharks are attacking each other, and the water is filled with blood. Right? That's the analogy. And it's very hard for you to actually find food because you're competing against all these different people. Whereas a blue ocean is uncontested. There are not a lot of competition, if at all, and you can easily catch your prey, right? So in business, when you hear people talk about Amazon FBA, hear people talk about selling yoga products, just basically anything that you see people doing multiple videos about on YouTube, then you know it's saturated, because if you're watching that video, then a bunch of other people are. I know that's a bit ironic because I'm doing this video on this right now, but again, it is true. By the time that you see people talking about this opportunity, in multiple videos in the coming few years, and you see it, featured on front pages and home pages and stuff like that, then it's very likely that this opportunity is going to be saturated as well, because more people are exposed to it, and then there are more competition. But the idea is that you don't want to go into the spaces or verticals that other people are talking about at the moment. You want to go into places where people are not talking about, industries that are underrated. But if you do your own research, look at the numbers, look at the data, you can find pockets of gold mines like this where people are not really entering it because they don't know about it. But at the same time, you just know that it's going to be lucrative, right? It's kind of like that area that time before people learn about Amazon FBA. That was the most profitable time, right? And it's the same with many new industries and new growing spaces within markets. When you enter it early, you can make the most amount of money. But when everyone else starts joining in, the profits decrease until it's just not worth it, and you get out of the market. So, going back to the gaming industry, as I mentioned, the gaming industry is where I really believe it's one of the most promising spaces. And if we actually segment it into its different categories, there's PC, mobile, and console. So these are the three main categories that actually make up the gaming market. And a lot of you might be surprised by which segment actually takes up the most revenue, but it's actually mobile gaming, and it's expected to make up around 59%, so almost 60% by 2021, and that makes it a 90 billion segment within the 152 billion gaming market. And another interesting fact is that 72% of all mobile spending is actually on games. So just think about that, like for every $100 that's spent on mobile, $72 is going directly to games. Again, this is just something that people don't expect, but is you can't really argue with data, right? But no, you don't really hear anyone, you don't hear any internet marketers or anyone talking about this or tapping into this at all. And within this segment of mobile gaming, we can actually drill down a segment even further by looking at the different countries. And when you do that, you find that China is actually the biggest market. It has a combined gaming market of 33 billion, expected to exceed 40 billion by 2023, and more than half of the current revenue within gaming, just like on a global scale, it's coming from mobile gaming. Okay, so the point is, mobile gaming is the biggest deal within gaming, which is itself a big deal. And it's also not just about revenue. We already talked about how revenue is not always the most important figure to look at, especially in its infancy, because oftentimes the growth rate is more important, since it's the part that you can actually capture. And so when you look at the profitability of mobile gaming market, it's very profitable, and they are really because of one single reason. It's the reason that the traditional way of selling mobile games or games in general is now outdated, and there's a new way of selling games. Traditionally, mobile games are more like mobile games or games in general are more like hardware products because you have to load it onto a DVD and sell it to people, and so there's a marginal cost there, right? You have to create the case for the DVD, you actually have to create the DVD itself and then sell it to people, and also you only get a one-time revenue for selling that DVD. Think about your GTA's and stuff like that. You just pay one time, right? Whereas nowadays in 2020, most games are monetized through what's called a freemium model, where you get the game for free, and then you pay for in-game perks. You pay for you know cosmetic upgrades, enhancements within the game, and so the game is more like a software product now as opposed to a physical product in the past. Now there is no marginal cost because you just download it straight away from the App Store. There's no DVD. No one uses those anymore. And also, there are so many different ways to monetize a game in the long term. So you're not just paying it one off. You actually, you can actually pay for the game multiple times as you pay for things inside the game. So you can think about games like the games you play on mobile, but also games like League of Legends, or any online games nowadays is a lot of them are monetized through newer and more innovative monetization strategies, which are actually more prevalent in the Chinese gaming market, which is also one reason why it's so much bigger than the Western markets, especially when it comes to mobile gaming. A lot of these monetization strategies just isn't adopted in the West because of how it's viewed. Gamers are generally very against the freemium model in the West, whereas it's very much adopted in China, which leads to the higher profitability of the companies. But the point is, the gaming industry is not just a fast growing industry, but also a very profitable industry. And at this point, you might be wondering, like, okay, so what? But the point I'm trying to make is that, when you look across all these different industries, when you compare, e-commerce, this health and fitness space within e-commerce, you compare with gaming. Gaming is just a far more lucrative market considering the growth rate and the amount of competition. Where it's basically right now it's a blue ocean, but Amazon FBA, Shopify, all that stuff is pretty much a red ocean right now in 2020. But you might be thinking as well, like, I'm not a game developer. I don't know how to code games. Like, what's the point of you talking about the gaming market? And the reason is because you don't actually have to be the one developing the games itself to make money. And I'm going to borrow an analogy that many people have made already before, which is the idea of the iPhone, right? Like, when the iPhone came out, obviously you're not going to be the one to create the iPhone or the chips or the screen for Apple, right? But there are so many businesses that are actually built on top of this ecosystem. So if you think about all the iPhone cases company, iPhone stands, iPhone chargers, for example, Anker. I don't know if you heard of Anker, Anker, from Amazon. I mean, these are literally all multi-million, dollar companies built on top of a product that a lot of people use. So in the same way, you don't have to be the one to create the actual games, but you could help create the secondary market, or you can operate in the secondary market for this product. And another thing I want to talk about is also stacking trends together, which is to say that we already picked the gaming industry because we know it's growing very quickly and there's a lot of new opportunities, a lot of uncaptured revenue there. But what if we stack that on top of another emerging technology, right? And when we talk about emerging technologies, we're talking about things like AI and all these buzzwords you'll be hearing about from different professions. And there's a reason why all these big corporations are talking about it. There's a reason why Facebook, all these biggest companies are like Fortune 500 companies are talking about how blockchain, how AI can transform their businesses, and none of the smaller businesses are talking about it. And the reason is because the reason an emerging technology is so powerful and so transformative is because it creates so much new space, or it expands the market so drastically that if you only capture a small percentage of the new market, you'll be making so much extra revenue than you're already making, right? So imagine if you have an existing industry, okay? Let's say industry A, and it's been the same way for the past 50 years. The market share has only grown like 1% per year, and right now it's at $100 billion, okay? The one emerging technology has the potential to turn this $100 billion industry into maybe like a $200 billion industry within a few years. And so, of course, existing players are going to focus on how to best, how to best apply these emerging technologies, because they could potentially, double or triple their revenue by capturing this new market, this new market share, right? This new market value, and that is really the idea. And so when you combine a growing market like the gaming market with a emerging technology that is dominant in that specific industry, then you get a really powerful combination of, you're operating in the growing market that's also being compounded or multiplied by a emerging technology. So then the kind of question is then, what is the emerging technology that you should be looking into? Okay, and I recently watched a video by Alex Becker. He did a great video back in 2019 actually, so if I just click onto that, I can show you guys. Yeah, so I'll recommend you guys actually watch that. And he did give me a lot of inspiration on doing this video as well. But the key is he made a really good analogy of the technologies we're looking at today. Like he mentioned the grain technology, which I'll talk about later on. But he made a comparison between what we're looking at now, which is the fourth industrial revolution, or what many people call the fourth industrial revolution, with the second industrial revolution, and people like J.P. Morgan, where people like Carnegie capitalized on the emerging technologies of the time, which was electricity and steel. Okay, they capitalized on those two technologies and applied it onto their own existing markets, which made them into one of the most wealthy people ever in history of mankind, right? And so the point being is, even if you just capture like 0.0001% of this new market that's going to be created, or the new value that's going to be created from these emerging technologies, then you're going to be very well off. And when we combine one of these emerging technologies with a growing market, that's even more powerful. Okay, so in the fourth revolution, basically, there are what we call the grain technologies. It's a commonly used phrase, and it refers to genetics, robotics, AI, and nanotechnology. These are the four main ones. That is the technologies that's going to transform our society into the next step, right, through this fourth industrial revolution. But of course, there are other technologies that are not mentioned here. Things like AR, VR, blockchain, and all these other things. So, how do you decide actually, which market you should operate in and which technology you should mix it with that? Because for me, I chose gaming because of my personal experience, my personal background, and it suits my skill sets. But for you, it may be something different. You may not be interested in this technology, in this space, and there might be other markets that are even better suited for your skill set and your experience. So how do you decide that? I think there are three main things that any person should really look at. Right. The first one is, what is your existing skill set and experience, and if you've worked in a certain industry, let's say you worked in automobile for like 20 years, and then it doesn't make sense to skip to gaming, right? It makes sense to keep operating in automobile and think about how an emerging technology like AI is going to transform automobile industry into self-driving industry, right? That's one example. So think about what is your skill set, what is your experience. Second thing is, you have to think about within your market, what is the maturity of different emerging technologies. So, you know, with self-driving, for example, the obvious one, as I mentioned already, is AI. But if you talk about nanotech or genetics within within um, within automobiles, then it's not really applicable because those technology are not mature yet in that industry. It's not really applied at all, right? If at all. And so it's really thinking about first what is the market you have experience in, and then what is emerging technology in that industry. And finally is understanding whether there is a big ecosystem built around that industry. So as we mentioned already, we don't want to be the ones creating the iPhones. We want to be the ones creating the iPhone cases. You want to be the shovel to the gold rush, right? The analogy where the most money was made by the people selling the tools and the gear to help people actually um, to actually help people find gold in the gold rush. It wasn't the people panning the gold; it was people selling the tools to help them find gold. And so you want to be those people, and you can be those people by understanding whether there's a big ecosystem. If there isn't, then that means there are not a lot of opportunities for you to be the the iPhone case people, to be the shovel sellers. So when it comes to deciding, your skill set, your experience, I'm not going to talk more about that because that's fairly self-explanatory. It really usually correlates to the industry you've been working in. For me, I'm really interested in gaming. I've been looking into gaming more recently, and I'll be taking up a position that gives me more experience. And so that's kind of space I'm targeting for the next few years. And then the second thing is the maturity of the emerging technology in that specific industry. So a really good research tool to use here is Gartner, and there is something called the hype cycle in Gartner research, which is basically this cycle you see here, and it's divided into 5 different stages where you have innovation trigger, peak of inflated expectations, trough of disillusionment, slope of enlightenment, and plateau of productivity. And these 5 stages describe the maturity of a certain technology. Okay, so let's say I've identified for me that my skill set is in mobile gaming. I've decided this is where I'm operating in because firstly it's growing, and secondly it's also where my experience lies. And then second, I've decided which I'll talk about later on, but for VR, for gaming, the emerging technology that's the most transformative is VR. And the answer to the last one is yes. So when you look at your technology within that space, you want to look at how close it is to being mass adopted, right? Because for every technology, it goes through this cycle. And in the first stage, it's the innovation trigger. So what this means is that there's a breakthrough in this technology, and it often generates significant publicity. So a lot of media mentions starts coming out. People think this is the next big thing is going to transform the world. It's very hyped up, right? And then the second thing is the peak of the inflated expectations. All the media thinks that it's going to transform the world. It's going to be the next internet, and then it goes through a trough of disillusionment. So that's usually the stage when the media hype dies down, and when everyone realizes that actually, the expectations doesn't meet reality. And then there's a slope of enlightenment, which is when people have kind of forgotten about it, but it's slowly developing and maturing in the background, and then eventually it gets to this plateau of productivity, which is when it's actually usable, when businesses or consumers can actually use these technologies, and it's not as exciting anymore, but it's actually generating value for people. So this is really the stage you want your technology to be in, but it's fine if they're just over here or maybe even here as well, because it usually gives you a few years to prepare your business, to develop your product for the time when it's adopted by the mass market. So what you see here is actually the hype cycle for display and vision, and what you can see here is also virtual reality, right? Virtual reality, as you can see here, is kind of at the end stages of the slope of enlightenment. So it also says that it's 2 to 5 years away from the plateau of productivity, which is when it's adopted by by the world, right? So The reason I chose VR is also precisely because of that. It gives me 2 to 5 years before it's mass adopted, and there are also other indicators, right? As you know, Facebook acquired Oculus, and all these other big companies, tech companies, also acquired all these different startups, and there's a reason for that because they also realize, there's so much to be captured here. There's so much extra value that's going to be added in, their existing industries that that is just so lucrative and so worthwhile for them to grab as much as they can from this blue ocean. And if you actually look at this is actually within VR, and breaking it down even further at what industries is driving that emerging technology, you see that video games is actually the overwhelming space. So we're kind of looking at it from both sides, right? We're saying that, okay, from the side of gaming, we know that VR is actually one of the most disruptive technologies within gaming, and the way you see this is actually through this chart here. You can see that within gaming, within gamers, they feel like virtual reality has the most transformative effect. But when we look at it from the other side, when we look at it from the side of the VR, AR growth, and which is driving the most of it, it's also video games. So what this means is that VR and gaming are both really important for each other. One is perceived to be really disruptive, and the other one is the one that is adopting this technology the most, which makes sense if you think about it, right? They are important to each other. So at the moment, there are still certain challenges to why VR is still a few years away from mass adoption, and the main thing is basically because the amount of VR content is limited. There are only like 200 games on VR, as opposed to thousands and hundreds of thousands for traditional 2D games or 3D games. And then there's also the fact that the hardware to enable VR is still way too expensive for the mass market. So in the next few years, and going back to this maturity hype cycle, is that in a few years, this is really going to, the cost of hardware is going to go down, content is going to be generated, and it will become mass adopted. So at this moment the question is then, what would the ecosystem look like, and what are the secondary market going to look like? For example, what sort of products, what sort of services are people going to require when virtual reality is mass adopted? Because once you can identify these opportunities in the secondary market, then you can go ahead and take advantage of them. You can take advantage of an opportunity that other people can't even see yet, right? And of course, there are going to be lots, right? There, for example, head-up displays, which is the kind of the goggles that you wear when you play VR games, actually gets you quite sick. As in, if you wear it for too long, you feel quite you get a headache and you feel quite lightheaded oftentimes, and that's one of the reasons as well why it's not comfortable to use. So maybe there's going to be a product sometime in the future that actually helps people relieve the sickness that they feel after playing a long game in virtual reality. Or if we just look at these problems here, for example, current VR head-mounted displays are also difficult to set up. Difficulties include setting up the play space, numerous wires which present a hazard to use if the user gets entangled in them. So there are so many accessories, like hardware accessories, you can actually provide here to help reduce this hazard, reduce this risk, or things that help you create a safe space for people to use when they use VR, which prevents them from walking outside of that space or alerts them, when they walk beyond a certain area. These are all things that could be part of the secondary market to VR, and really could be a big market in the coming few years, where literally no one is operating and no one is thinking about right now. So again, that is really my specific choice of where I think, for me personally, the best opportunity is in the 2020 and beyond. And for me, that's going to be, how can I create a business in the secondary market within the VR space for mobile gaming, right? But for you guys, it's going to be something different, because as you remember, the first steps you start off with is, what is your skill set and experience, and what market does that lead you into, and then from there you actually think about what are the emerging technologies are impacting your market the most, which are the most mature, which is going to generate the most value, and then you ask yourself, is a big ecosystem going to be generated around that industry, around that new space that's being transformed by this emerging technology. So if you like this content, if you like content around business strategy, around mobile gaming in the VR space and emerging technologies, or really anything about how to actually how do you most effectively generate a passive income in the next few years and help yourself create a life of financial freedom, then go ahead and click the subscribe button, like this video, or if you have any questions, comment below